Hello there guys, this is Steven again. As usual, today I'm going to be talking about some more figures from my collection, and this time this would be part 3 and the final part of my talk about the Aquaman action figures. So to round up my previous 2 videos, this particular one will cover the 4 different versions of Aquaman that I have that released over the years. So I'll start with the older ones first. What we have here is a Justice League of America Aquaman, released in the early 2000s. He came with a trident, which is this one right here. And this may not be, of course, the correct version, because sometimes I interchange these tridents between these Aquaman to see which one fits the best of the particular one. He has articulation in the head, so he can turn his head 360 degrees and left to right, and this is more of a classic look of his. He can move his arms forward and a little bit sideways, so about that much. He comes with this translucent blue hand that in some comics I noticed from that time period that you could just release water from that hand. And by the way, this figure was made by DC Direct, which was the old name for DC Collectibles. So the other arm can also move a little bit sideways. There is articulation in the elbows and in the wrist as well, so he can position his hand in a different way. There is no interchangeable hands, at least back then that idea was not present yet. However, his right hand does not have any articulation, so only the translucent one does. There is wrist articulation in this one, but none in the one where he holds the trident. No articulation in the chest or on the upcrunch or in the waist. He cannot do any splits. He can move his leg quite a bit backward and quite a bit, well, not quite a bit, but sort of forward. There is a ankle articulation there, and none in the ankles. And he came with a plastic stand, which unfortunately is not with me anymore. May have misplaced it somewhere. But the stand itself didn't really look that interesting. It only said JLA on it, inscribed on it, and that was about it. It was in a very plain black color and with white lettering. So I believe this is roughly more or less how Aquaman looked like before he lost his hand, or at least prior to that moment. Which brings me to the next figure of Aquaman, which will continue what I just said, and that would be the reimagined Aquaman, or what happened when he lost his hand. Now there is different. When I say lost his hand, this is what I mean. Instead of a hand, he gets a hook. And as you can tell, he has a very different look to him. He has mustache and a beard, which he never had in his classic version, and a long hair. He does not wear any orange shirt. He wears a semi-armor that covers one of his arms and a portion of his body. He still wears green pants, but this time in light and dark green. So compare him to the actual classic one, you can already see that there is quite a bit of a difference. Now, how he lost his hand, there is many different stories, but I usually like the one I've seen in the Justice League cartoon series from the beginning of the 2000s, that at that time he had both of his hands, but he already had beard and mustache and long hair. That he lost his hand when one of his arch enemies wanted to kidnap his Aquaman's son, who was still a baby, and wanted to kill him in front of him. And in order not to lose his son, he jumped after the baby and managed to grasp him. But somehow in the process, I don't remember the exact detail, he managed to lose the hand. It was permanently crushed. No, sorry, it wasn't permanently crushed. I remember it was actually, he was chained to a rock or something of that sort, and he had to free himself in order to save his son. So he had no choice. He used the buckle of his belt, and he slashed and cut off his right hand while he was still chained, and managed to free himself. And he managed to save his son, but in the process he had to sacrifice his hand. That story, how he lost the hand, is actually to me the one that makes more sense compared to the ones in the comics. Anyway, the figure itself came in a multi-pack from DC Direct that contained 5 members of the Justice League. It contained Aquaman, classic Superman, and Wonder Woman. It also contained black and gray Batman figure, and John Stewart Green Lantern. So it had 5 of them in it. This would be the Aquaman from that multi-set, and I don't remember him being released as a single figure. So he can move his arms 360 degrees. There is elbow movement, no wrist articulation. He can move arms sideways just a tiny bit. There is no movement in the waist or in the chest. He cannot do a split, but he can move his leg about that much forward and about a lot more backward, which is strange. He should be able to move a lot more forward than backward, but oh well. He comes with no weapons or a trident. His left arm is... Sorry, I just realized I told you wrong. His hooked arm is the left one. The normal arm that still remained the same is the right one. So he lost his left hand trying to save his son, and it was the salvage then replaced with a golden hook that can be shot like a harpoon in a bottle. And he has a sculpted Aquaman belt, meaning his classic belt. And the armor is also sculpted on, so there is no way of moving that. The head itself is on a ball joint, but again, the usual issue is because of the hair that's sculpted and it's long. It sort of impedes him from moving the head too much, so I can get about that much movement from him, and a little bit the other way as well, and that's about all he can do. However, his figure of him looking like this did show up a few more times prior to this one, or around the same time as this one, such as in the Justice League Unlimited and the Justice League animated series from the beginning of the 21st century, and he looked pretty much more or less the same, except the style of the figure looked very different because it's animated. And there was another figure of him looking like this from the second half of the 90s, when it was released by Kenner Company, from part of the line called the Total Justice, which were 5-inch figures of the DC characters. And in that line he was released looking like this, but sort of pre-posed. They had even less articulation than this one, but the looks and the hook was all the same. So, moving on to the remaining 2 Aquamans that I will talk about, they are representing, again, reverting back to Aquaman's classic look. So we have another Aquaman right here from the DC Collectibles with a trident, which not necessarily is the correct one for this version, but he has grip in hand, so he can put his trident either in left or right. No articulation in the waistline, no ab crunch. He can move his arms sideways about that much. There is a bicep swivel. There is elbow articulation, and there is a wrist articulation. So this is somewhat an improvement. He can turn his head left to right. His legs move forward about that much, and there is an knee articulation, and there is also articulation in the boots, so he is able to move it left to right. There is no articulation in the ankles, and there is no ankle pivot or anything like that. And he's wearing his orange mesh long sleeve shirt with his classic green gloves, which are not always shown in every figure or representation of him, and dark green pants. So this figure was aiming for his classic look. And then the last one that I will talk about is from DC Collectibles again, DC Icons line, which unfortunately ended without finishing any other characters that it was aiming to release. So he's a lot smaller figure, so he's about, I would say, roughly 5 inches tall, shorter than the rest. He comes with his classic version of his trident, which is this one and the same kind of trident he was using also in DC Universe Classic storyline and in the Superpowers Kenner toyline from the 80s. Now the main problem with this figure and the rest of the figures in the DC Icons was that some people found it annoying that they're so small. They're not even 6 inch, so that was sort of a minus. They did come with, and just like him, the rest of them, they all came with a lot of accessories. Aquaman here would come with several hands that can be exchanged in a fist form, in a grasping form, and so forth. And he comes with an alternate head, which I don't have here on display, and the head looks almost exactly the same. There's a hole in the middle of the forehead where you put sort of this telepathic plastic piece to emulate the idea that he's using telepathy to ask the creatures of the sea to help him, which is also seen in the cartoon series and so forth. Now on to his articulation. He can do pretty much a full split. There we go. There is no articulation in the waistline, however there is an ab crunch. His legs can also move about slightly forward, not a whole lot, and there is articulation in the knees, so he can bend his knees, and he does have articulation in the ankles, finally that one of them does, and he can move his foot forward, backward, and there is an ankle pivot. So there we go, to try and pose him in some different poses for a change. His hands are exchangeable in such a sense that they have a peg, each of them on the end, where you just plug it in the hole that's molded in his arm, and then you just slowly push it in, and they will just click in. So this is how the hand looks like with the peg I'm talking about, and this is the hole where you would just insert the hand. So he has wrist articulation in his hands. Now I would also, which I already probably mentioned in some older videos, every time we need to exchange a hand in any kind of these figures that require that, I would usually suggest caution, because these pegs are easily breakable, so they won't really stay put properly, and you just have to sort of wriggle them slowly till they fit in. And the more times you exchange, the bigger the danger of those pegs breaking or literally being broken off inside the arm. He has a bicep there, and as I mentioned, he has the head. Now the way these figures, and especially him here, the way they were made, they remind me a great deal of the Superpowers, or his version, the version of Aquaman from Superpowers in the vintage toy line. And he looks pretty much almost exactly like a replica of that one, except with a lot more articulation added to him. He's a good figure, and there is another version that was released soon after DC Icons in an attempt to save the line, where they made the figures bigger, and they used almost pretty much the same molds, but without so many accessories, and in some cases no accessories at all. So he was made taller, and more in the line with 6 inch. The only problem with that enlarged version of him was that the face did not come out well. In case of this Aquaman, the face doesn't look bad at all. It was very well done. But in the case of the enlarged version, which I don't have here to show you, his face was painted very badly, and it just doesn't look much like him, and it's one of the worst versions, I believe, that exists. And that enlarged version was released with at least the remaining major 6 characters, meaning Wonder Woman, Flash, Batman, Superman, and Aquaman, of course, and Cyborg. Half of those characters did not come out well, even though that was a decent attempt to try and at least prolong the line with making the characters larger. Now, of course, don't get me wrong, the DC Icons line did see several waves released in this smaller size, and there is still a lot of characters that they didn't make, but at least there is some in existence from the line for as long as it lasted. So anyway, I still think this is a pretty good figure, regardless of the minor annoyance that he's smaller in height, but it doesn't really matter. He still looks pretty good, and I think he's worth having, along with at least several other characters from the DC Icons. But anyway, this would be the last figure for me to cover in this discussion of the Aquaman and Aquaman related characters. So that's all for me regarding him. I hope you guys liked the video, and I will catch you next time with another video on a different action figure topic. Thank you for watching. Bye.